during the overnight hours of July 4th, 2025, with summer camps and RV parks along central Texas's Guadalupe River filled for the holiday weekend. A catastrophe was unfolding. In the night skies above the hill country, a meteorological phenomenon known as a mesoscale convective vortex had formed over the worst possible location. Fueled by the remnant moisture of a tropical storm that had made landfall in southern Mexico 5 days earlier, it was a storm system in exactly the wrong place, in exactly the wrong time. There you can see the absolute ferocity of the tragedy. 2 dead deer carcasses intermixed in the debris.
With their deuce and a halves, the Army National Guard is able to get where others can't. These trucks, they tell me, are able to ford water that's 5.5 foot deep. The mission of these men is to rescue the stranded.
For the Guadalupe and Medina River basins, 1978 was a once-in-500-year flood, and it was caused by a tropical storm that had winds never exceeding 50 miles per hour. On the surface, there was nothing scary about Amelia. She was weak, disorganized, and only barely attained tropical storm status right as she made landfall in South Texas. She was a very typical storm for that time of year in the Atlantic Basin. And yet, it was not Amelia's wind speeds that posed the greatest threat to life and property. With extreme rainfall exceeding 3, even 4 feet in spots, the Guadalupe River basin overflowed catastrophically. And in Bandera County, the Medina River turned into a 50-foot wall of water, sweeping away dozens, if not hundreds, of livestock. Eyewitnesses later recounted the stench of the decaying animals in the flood's aftermath. But as devastating as the flood of '78 was, it was hardly the first time. Over the years, the hill country region of south central Texas has become known as Flash Flood Alley, and as the name implies, it is one of the most flood-vulnerable places in the entire United States. This is caused not only by the steep, hilly terrain, but also the fact that the bedrock is solid limestone, and only a shallow layer of loose clay sits atop of it. Spiderwebbing through these impermeable hills are a series of major rivers, including the Llano, Pedernales, Medina, and last but not least, the Guadalupe. Originating in Kerr County and emptying out into San Antonio Bay, it is usually a small stream shaded by towering bald cypress trees along its banks. But with hill country's topography, the limestone bedrock, and the loose topsoil, the Guadalupe River has become one of the most notorious in the entire country for flash floods. Going back over a century, there are dozens of different flood events that have terrorized the rustic country towns and cities along its normally placid and scenic length. Since 1921, one extreme rain event after another has caused the Guadalupe River to rapidly rise by 10+ feet in only minutes, sweeping away homes, vehicles, families, roads, and even inundating entire cities. But out of all of these flood events, the deadliest and most destructive ones were not caused by regular heavy thunderstorms. They were caused by tropical cyclones and their remnants. Like Tropical Storm Amelia in 1978, the floods that devastated San Antonio in 1921 were from the remnants of a Category 1 hurricane. In the first month of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season, this historical pattern was about to repeat itself. Developing from a precursor disturbance over the Yucatan Peninsula, Tropical Storm Barry formed over the Bay of Campeche as the second named storm of the season and quickly made landfall near Tampico, Mexico. Over the following days, without anyone noticing, the remnant moisture of Tropical Storm Barry traveled northward into Texas. On July 3rd, the Storm Prediction Center issued a moderate risk for excessive rainfall, highlighting the possibility that streams and creeks in the Hill Country region could overflow their banks. Later that afternoon, a flood watch was issued for western Hill Country, as near-range models realized that the remnant mid-level circulation of Tropical Storm Barry was merging with a stalled-out mid-latitude trough, in addition to an abundant plume of tropical moisture from the eastern Pacific. Together, these meteorological ingredients combined to form a large, sprawling, and organized cluster of thunderstorms that began to burgeon over the Texas Hill Country. After sunset, the heaviest thunderstorms began to train over the headwaters of the Guadalupe River, which split between the North Fork and the South Fork, with torrential downpours occurring over both forks simultaneously. A flash flood warning was quickly issued for Kerr County at 1:14 a.m. on July 4th. In only a handful of hours, a staggering 7 to 8 inches of rain had already fallen over the headwaters. The massive amount of rain that had fallen in such a short time was rapidly channeled into both the North and South Forks, creating two separate flood waves that combined at the Guadalupe River's confluence near Hunt, Texas. At 4:07 a.m., July 4th, the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency for Kerr County as flood gauges along the Guadalupe River suddenly started to rise exponentially. The disaster that was now taking place under the cover of darkness was far worse than any of us could imagine at the time. When the floodwaters from the North and South Fork met, they created a massive 30-foot tall flood wave. A tsunami. Born from rainwater. With unimaginably violent force, the flood wave traveled down the Guadalupe River, bursting from its banks, sweeping trees, cars, homes, into its seething wrath. And all the while, the rain continued to fall. By 5:10 a.m., the river gauge in Hunt, Texas had risen to 37 feet. In just 45 minutes, the Guadalupe River had reached its highest water depth ever recorded. An hour and a half later, the catastrophic flood wave arrived in the city of Kerrville. Topping the Nimitz Lake Dam, the waters charged through with lethal velocity. Hill Country's thin, rocky topsoils running down off of the limestone bedrock. The storm's 11 inches of rain had nowhere to go. It was the most extreme flood in the history of the Guadalupe River. Making the floods even worse was the fact that the soils in south central Texas had been hard-baked by a prolonged drought, making them even more unable to absorb water. When the sun rose on that July 4th holiday, a nightmarish reality dawned. Anything and anyone who had been close to the Guadalupe River was gone. When I first drove to the river, you could not tell that a natural disaster had occurred until you were right on top of the river. It had all happened within a few hundred yards of the Guadalupe's banks. Everything outside of that looked completely normal. In the 2 days following the flood, more than 850 water rescues were conducted by local fire departments and the U.S. Coast Guard. This is the epicenter of the disaster on July 4th, 2025. the Guadalupe River. It rose by 26 feet in just 45 minutes early on the morning of Independence Day. And the force and the violence of the water cannot be more plainly and vividly represented as that tree stump right there. That is snapped off nearly at the base. When that flood wave was coming through, all this way above my head was underwater. If you look up there, okay, this is how steep the embankment is. The water went well up over that embankment across the road and just swept everything along this normally dry bank up here. Swept it all, and now it's all bent this way. You see down this side, there are more planes coming through. You see down this side just how strong that current was. Look at this. That tree right there, that tree is completely debarked. I said this earlier, this looks like something you would see out of the aftermath of a violent tornado, where the tornadoes come through and they strip the trees of their bark. But this was not a tornado. This was not caused by wind. This was caused by floodwaters. This was caused by the river flowing by, and it literally stripped that tree completely of its bark. That's a different kind of experience here, to kind of to just try and grasp and visualize how high and how deep this water was. This is James Keel Riverbend Park in Comfort, Texas. This is how high the Guadalupe River rose on the morning of July 4th, 2025. For context, the river is clear over there. You can't even see it from here. And yet, when that flood wave came down, in less than 45 minutes, it went from the level it's at now to above my head, past that debarked spot on the tree. That is the river level down there 3 days later. And from down there, during the July 4th flood wave, that water came up so high and so powerful that it lifted this size of a tree branch, a stump even. I mean, look at the scale of this debris. And it was lifted all the way up here onto this bridge. Look at how strong the current was pulling. This tree has been completely whiplashed, I guess would be the best word for it. Look at the size of that log, that stump hoisted on top. This is a whole tree. The bark has been sheared off, something we've seen a lot. There's another debris cluster here up against these trees. Again, 2x4s, pieces of foam, plywood, This is all downstream of Kerrville, Hunt, and Camp Mystic. This is where much of the debris ended up. Take a look at this tree. The thickness of this tree, it is completely snapped. Snapped at the base. I think it really speaks to ferocity of this flash flood when not even a wildlife note was coming. This is the extreme of the extreme when it comes to flash flooding. This is in Kerrville. And look at this tree. Look at the force. It is completely stripped. Look how tall these are. Look at this. Look at this thing. This is some of the most extreme damage you will ever see from river flooding. Take a look at the size of this tree. Not only is it completely debarked, the bark is just shredded off, but check out how it is bent. It is bent 90 degrees sideways. This is an unbelievably violent flow of water that caused this. The tree has just been stripped of its bark completely and bent all the way to the ground. Like something you'd see out of a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane, but this is nowhere near the shore. This is in the hill country of Texas. This is Kerrville right here. Look at the ground. The ground is just destroyed too. Concrete everywhere, but look at this tree. It was just completely, nearly snapped. As was this one right here. This one broken off at the base. Again, like something you'd see out of a Category 4 or 5 hurricane. But this was all river flooding. Look at this. Just broken off like a toothpick. Over here. If there was any structure here, anything at all, it'd be completely obliterated. Look how wide the river is here. Then you imagine what that water level was during the flood wave. that much higher. It is truly unimaginable. Later data would show that at the peak of the flood, flow rate through Kerrville was 120,000 cubic feet per second. In Comfort, it was 177,000 cubic feet of water per second, confirming it to be one of the most extreme flood events in U.S. history, and the deadliest in the United States since the 1976 Big Thompson River flood in Colorado. Many victims were caught while sleeping in cabins, RVs, homes, or campgrounds along the river. In particular, the communities near Hunt, including HTR Texas Hill Country Campground, the Blue Oak RV Park, and famously, Camp Mystic, were the hardest hit. These communities, many of which were located in FEMA-designated special flood hazard areas, were horrendously ravaged, with the Guadalupe River's water levels reportedly reaching the tops of cabins. Hundreds of other survivors had to be rescued from where they were clinging in trees. 1 year later, we remember this disaster as a sobering reminder as to the violence and power water is capable of.